do a little bit of a different tack of looking at Phantom Menace as well as the prequels from the drag racing perspective, which very nicely and coincidentally matches up with Ford v Ferrari. I actually wanted to do this review last year and get the channel running, but I just wanted to do a lot of research on Star Wars, and so I just conflicted, but I really wanted to get to it. I don't think Ford v Ferrari is like a top 10 film, as many people have said. It's definitely a very fine film. I'd definitely give it like 3 stars, but I think there's a great little thread that runs through Ford v Ferrari that links up with Phantom Menace, the most obvious being the drag race. But if we look at it from the wider perspective, George has always been a big car fanatic. In fact, he was going to be a driver and would just work on cars and a mechanic, but he had a horrific accident very early on. And he survived, but it changed his life completely. He decided that was just too dangerous, and that's how he got into film, thinking what he could do besides cars. But if you look at his first early projects, he actually worked on Grand Prix as a camera person. If you can look up his credits, he also did his student film, again, on a car subject. He basically did a tone poem on a race. And so this has always been like a lifelong passion. So not surprisingly, when it came time to do Star Wars, he was going to get back into it. Then we'll just do Ford v Ferrari a little bit, and then we'll get back into Phantom Menace. The basic plot of Ford v Ferrari is pretty simple. That we have like these two antagonizing personalities with Ken and Shelby. Shelby's played by Matt Damon, and Ken is played by Christian Bale. And of course, Ken is British, and Christian Bale is British, and it's this very clash of personalities and how they can essentially beat Ferrari, which is this Italian company, and that Ford feels humiliated and he wants to get back at them, and as well as sort of get Ford back on top because it's struggling at this time during the 1960s. And it's a really good, fine picture in terms of the drama between these guys. But I mean, what's really interesting, how it hooks us up with the prequels, is how much there's a focus on the real technology and how much they need to keep working with it, and how much it both dehumanizes them but also gives them another chance at life, and this sort of back and forth with the technology and how it's very grounded. I mean, one of the major differences between Star Trek and Star Wars is how grounded the technology in Star Wars is always. In fact, there's this one sequence where Anakin is being looked at by his mother with basically an iPad. So that's one of the things that very much differentiates the two universes, is that Lucas always wants the technology to be very much plausible, even within this kind of weird futuristic reality, and sort of make it plausible that we're looking at real life. Now, I don't think Mangold is doing anything as extreme as Lucas in terms of doing a documentary, but it does have a lot of documentary-style shooting where we just see the cars and only the cars, and we sort of get the mechanics of how a real race would occur. It's not many dramatic angles. It's not, this fast cutting. It's very much very slow-paced at moments, even when the cars are going at insane speeds, because again, he wants to show you like a real race is very dangerous, but it's also very boring because the driver just has to be so focused and concentrate. But when we turn to the Phantom Menace proper, we see a lot of little things going on which I missed. Sort of like there's a lot of flags that occur at the very beginning. There's all this ceremony right before Anakin begins the race. There's also something that people forget, that Sebulba tried to sabotage him. With Kubrick, it's often a case of technology, basically dehumanizing human beings, but it's sort of like unintentional. It's not that machines try to destroy people, it's just the way that the people and the technology work together. But in Phantom Menace, we see clearly Sebulba, tries to sabotage Anakin, and you kind of wonder, if Qui-Gon is nearby, why did he let that happen? Obviously, he may have limited power against Watto, but why doesn't he do something against Sebulba? And I think there's a theory that actually Qui-Gon did help Anakin with the Force, sort of helping to guide him during the race. I don't know if that's true. I think that's a big theory, and I'm not going to pursue it here. But I'm sure there's something to that, so that even though, Anakin is struggling during the pod race, people think he's just sort of racing to the end and he's having no problems. But if you look very closely, he's always constantly double-checking to see what's going on and to see whether the pod is going as fast as it can, and also, just being concerned with safety. Because although I do like the sequence, I think it's a little too obvious, because if you look at Sebulba's pod, it is so much larger than Anakin's. It's huge. I mean, even when he crashes at the very end, his car is still much bigger than Anakin. So he's making this very little, this simple dichotomy between the little versus the big, the small guy versus the big guy, or the individual versus the system. That's one of the major themes that always comes up in almost all his works is individualism and how much the individual wants to be free of the system or this larger authority. And his earlier films like American Graffiti obviously link up to this. I think there's also a kind of Kubrick touch in terms of there's a lot of self-references just within the pod race sequence. I've already covered like the student film that he did, as well as Grand Prix, but there's also a lot of THX, of course, this way that technology is sort of being used for you, but also against you. And then there's obviously Star Wars. I mean, he's quoting himself. So as much as people say, well, isn't he stealing a lot from others? Yes, that's true, but Kubrick and him always do a lot of self-reference and a lot of self-parody. I mean, he literally told his people he really wanted the spaceships to be a lot more like cars. And so when you see it closely in Phantom Menace, Attack of the Clones, and Revenge of the Sith, it feels like drag racing when you see the spaceships. It doesn't feel like they're actually ships. They're more like cars, and they're racing together and trying to, compete with one another. So I just want some final words on the actual drag race within Phantom Menace. It's a really interesting thing, even though he does do a lot of things like you do in Ford v Ferrari with these very sharp turns and these very dangerous curves and all these other things. There's also this big Western setting that he's setting in. I mean, people just think, well, did he just choose that for no reason? I mean, one reason, of course, is that you have these wide open spaces so you can do these great wide angles. But again, it's very much in keeping with the Western theme of Star Wars, that they're in this kind of rugged frontier territory where there's never any sharp line between good and evil or right or wrong. But I will say, finally, I do think the pod race is mainly about we should feel good with Anakin, that the technology is actually rehumanizing him. Obviously, there's this foreshadowing with Anakin always being around machines, that he's going to become a machine himself in Darth Vader. But I think the pod race is sort of like a what-if moment where if he had been more lucky or had gone down a different path, he could have done, what George did. He would just be working on cars, he would be, dating girls and sort of live this nice little life with his mother, hopefully free, and just live this nice creative life with this technology because he's just very good with machines and fixing things. So I think people miss that when he's talking about Anakin. He's talking about himself. There's a lot of autobiography with Anakin saying, yeah, I'm just really good at machines. And then, but of course, George moved on to being, more of this film artistic person, very creative. And Anakin just doesn't have that outlet. He's just not being allowed those opportunities. And so, of course, he goes into a different path with the Jedi, and we see that and I've already covered this in other videos, that it's not always the right path. It has a lot of negativity associated with it because of the violence. Yes, there's a lot of adventure, but there's also a lot of peril by choosing that life. So that's what we have, this very interesting drag race thread through all his works with cars and American Graffiti, THX, Star Wars, of course, and his student films, and how that links up with Ford v Ferrari and this theme of man versus technology. But I think with the Phantom Menace, it's more about technology actually can rehumanize people and actually bring people together, because we see at the very beginning all those flags and how all these different cultures and races can sort of come together for the competition. So there you have it, this very short essay on the drag race moment of Star Wars and how it links up today with Ford v Ferrari. This has been Popcult Analysis on the Lucas Factor and Ford v Ferrari. Popcult Analysis. If you like the content, please hit the like button below. Please like and or subscribe. Thank you for listening. Please be safe.